They say that every day there's one celebrity on the internet, and your job is to not be it.
Yeah, I do know how they say that.
Yeah.
I've never heard anybody say that, but I believe you. It sounds like a solid rule.
Brandy Jensen, she's like a writer out in New York, said it, I think. Well, today there was a celebrity in Sacramento in Temple Coffee.
Yeah.
Y'all hear about this?
Oh,
Yeah.
I did hear about it.
I saw this last night. I got home at I don't know, around 8 or something, and pulled up Reddit, and it was on the front page of Reddit. And I was like, oh, weak. So I went to put it on Facebook, and 5 people already had it up on Facebook.
It was already all over the place. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, first of all, it's perfect for this show. Temple Coffee, let's tell people what happened. Basically, one of the employees was told to take his mask off at work because masks went against dress code. And when he pushed back against that, they wrote him up. And then this launched into this whole question process about wait, we're not allowed to wear masks. And so HR had to send out a clarifying email, and the clarifying email basically said, no, you can't wear masks.
Yeah, it says, at this time, Sacramento and Yolo County have not mandated that masks be worn at this time, and Temple does not allow, in bold, the use of masks in our cafes as it violates the dress code. And then they go on for the rest of this thing to be like, if you have a problem with it, you can fucking quit. Basically.
Contact
if you
EDD, yeah.
I mean, it's they said everything except if you don't want to stay safe by not wearing a mask, or if you want, if you're not into abiding by our fucking stupid ass dress code, you're fired.
Yeah,
but you would have to quit, right? And then they wouldn't be eligible for unemployment.
Right, exactly. So you're fucked either way. It's basically they effectively said, here's a thought. Why don't you take these masks and shove them up your asses?
Right. Yeah.
You gotta love watching these companies go viral for this shit too, especially because it's dude, this is Sacramento. There's 20 boutique coffee roasters here.
Half the people
how are you gonna turn yourself into the Lex Luthor of the coffee industry in fucking in Sacramento?
Well, they responded today on Instagram.
Today, yes.
That with a beautiful non-apology, right?
Yeah, hella fucking weak.
The owner blamed the HR guy.
It says we are deeply saddened.
This was not authorized.
And disappointed by the company email that was sent out to team members yesterday. The email included misinformation and miscommunications regarding our current health and safety protocols and policies. Clear. The email should not have been sent out and was not approved by Temple Operations.
Amazing. This is
what?
I'm speechless.
You can't even.
First time ever on this show.
No, you were speechless last week too.
Okay.
Because of the Auburn.
What's really interesting to me about this, though, is that their rationale, right? Because there was a time when CDC was saying, we think you all should use some masks. And WHO was which is the World Health Organization, was no, we don't recommend that, right? Mm-hmm. So there's actual controversy about the mask use that we could talk about, right? It's the idea that if they're not worn properly, you touching your face all the time, it is not doing a lot of good. If you don't take it off properly, you can actually increase your risk of infecting yourself, right? So there are good reasons to say, hey, we want to be cautious about how to use masks. And also, all masks are not created equal. But that's not what they said.
Not at all. That is not the concern that they're having
18 very legitimate reasons to be able to say, here is the rationale for what we're asking you to or not to do. And they chose the 19th one that made no sense, which I just think is hilarious.
It's perfect. This is the thought I was trying to gather. This coffee shop is sort of, they have this Midtown location that is just it's perfect for our show. It is the embodiment of capitalism. Their
Right.
floor is paved with pennies.
You walk on money to order your coffee.
It's incredible.
Is that the one that's got a motorcycle in the middle?
Yeah, and
very
for
expensive
some
motorcycle or something.
And so their reason to their employees is like, we have dress code. We don't like how it looks. And they will put their lives in danger because of aesthetic reasons.
Well, not just their lives,
so
the lives of all the customers. Like the employees wearing masks helps everybody who wants to buy a cup of fucking Temple's coffee, right?
I love it. Well, and I guess a little final thought on this story. They say in the Cap Radio piece that the manager was the one who told them to take it off, but this employee had worn masks on multiple shifts before, and this day the owner happened to be there. That's where his office is, and magically that was the day that he was told to take it off. So it's so rich. It's so amazing that the owner threw HR under the bus in the non-apology. It's like, it's just like chef's kiss.
My my favorite Facebook take on this so far is one of my friends posted this comment that was like, with no context because none is needed, that was like, well, where am I supposed to go then now with my $6 to buy a cup of coffee that tastes like gasoline? Speaking of chef's kiss, just that's some premeditated hating. I love it.
That's perfect. Fuck those guys.
Well, I'm just glad we made this whole intro without saying any pun about Temple getting roasted.
But did we make it? Did we make it?
Now we did. Now we did.
Bitch.
That was meta.
All right. Well, now that Dave's ruined it, I guess we'll start the fucking show.
Let's go.
Voices, the things they said. Voices, some from those dead. All the voices heard. Voices, things we say. Voices, they're in your head. All the voices heard.
Why, hello, everyone. How are we? You have Kempa.
And Skylar.
And Shannon.
And Flo.
All right. The gang's all here.
What's so funny about a little friendly hello?
Just Mr. Rogers' neighborhood.
Yeah, all right. That was great. Great start.
Flipping off my slippers.
I really.
Putting on
really
your
tickled.
cardigan.
Yeah, so if only. So I suppose a lot has happened in the last 3 days. All time is really just melding together right now. But it does feel different since our Monday show. Things have been happening. Yeah, how's everyone going through their transition of hour to hour and coming to the realization that time is a construct?
Oh man, I don't know. It's weird for me. We're going to talk about it later, but like reading the Newsom's most recent kind of address has some stuff that is pertinent to me and my work, and the fact that that's probably not coming back for a very, very long time. So I'm I don't know. It's been an interesting few days while I've been like, I mean, it's not like I don't have time to process the shit and figure out what I'm going to do, you know? So,
right.
You know,
I mean, like it's almost like some of this stuff is almost like a grieving process. There's like,
it's absolutely that
full on. Yeah. Like the stages it takes to come to accept like, okay, this is my reality now.
Yeah.
I had the conversation yesterday with some friends over a Zoom happy hour that I was really trying, or that I am actively trying to do the work that where my brain can make some sense of this existing like for a year plus in some form or fashion. And if I can just like get my brain to a place where I can be okay with that, then I can work on all the other like underlying shit.
Yeah.
I mean, a month of it feels like March was such a long year, right? Like, and April too.
I forgot what month it was today.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not.
That makes sense. We're at that place.
Yeah.
Yeah. Flo's face is frozen in such a serious way.
I know. Well, let's start talking about something funny to. Well, wait. Why don't we just get started? How about we turn to our resident cop analyst, Skylar, to discuss Sacramento County law enforcement's new joint announcement.
Yeah. So, just kind of off the top of my head, so there's an article in the Bee. There was KCRA had a piece on it too. But basically, the cops, as of the last couple of days, have sort of stated like we will come out to large gatherings and either ticket or arrest people who are congregating in big groups irresponsibly. I guess, like, according to the article, they're like. Recently there's been a few like big house parties with like 100 people at them, and then sideshows, which is like a big group of people burning donuts, whatever. It's like a bunch of people in their cars, like fucking hanging out and, not socially distancing.
That's not what I thought of when I thought sideshow.
Yeah, I had never heard that term before.
Oh, dude,
Sideshow Bob?
As a side note to the
a bunch of
sideshow,
clowns on the corner, all like within 6 feet of each other.
That's kind of what I was picturing.
As a side note
Juggling.
to the sideshow, so I do a weekly like Zoom happy hour with a bunch of family members, and we just kind of touch base and catch up and whatever. And sideshows came up. So I have like this lady, like, so my aunt is like the sweetest old lady ever, and I can't remember how we got up on it, but she didn't know the word sideshow, so the way that she referred to it is these young men and their wheelie parties. And
Yes.
So while we were laughing about wheelie parties, then my dad jumps in with, "Oh yeah, what did he say? Those pump and hop guys," to refer to these dudes. I like.
And you're like, yes.
Dude, the caucasity was like, the caucasity needle like broke through the fucking the thing. It was amazing. Incredible.
Okay, so law enforcement in Sac County is announcing a shift, right? They've said that up until now, they have only been education. Now they say that they're going to enforce by way of fines, and they promise us that it will only be the most egregious acts. So everything's okay, right?
Yeah, I mean, dude, anytime you read Scott Jones being like, all right, this is how it's gonna be, it's like, man, you fucking suck,
Yeah, I mean, he says at one point in the Bee article that it's important for folks to understand that all of Sacramento law enforcement is united in our desire to keep our community safe and in our willingness to enforce the order against unreasonable violations. Like, that is historically not what he has done. Like,
no.
Keeping our community
to put it lightly, yeah.
Yeah, that's not what
so
he's
it's
been
like,
about.
How the fuck are we supposed to believe now in the middle of a global fucking crisis when police just have like the biggest hall pass to do whatever the fuck they want to POC communities, that they're not just gonna fuck with people? Like,
they are.
No,
they absolutely are.
100% agree. I mean, we can't. This is just like, we get into talks about how it's shitty to like how masks aren't the same for a white person as they are for a black or brown person or like a trans person, and we have like, these are the conversations that we have to have when we talk about giving police a hall pass.
Yeah.
to go out there and just pull people over whenever. Like,
well, Flo, you and Scott Jones are meditation buddies. Have you discussed?
We are meditation buddies. We hang out all the time. And it's really.
Oh, sorry.
Flo, are you there?
Yeah, I'm still here.
Okay.
Cool. We lost you for a minute.
Can you start over with? Can you start over with? I guess we are meditation buddies.
Yes, I guess we are meditation buddies. I sit on the Sheriff's Outreach Community Advisory Board, which is a fancy way of saying that people are appointed by either their city representatives or their county representatives to be official community advisors to the sheriff, and to share concerns with him. And if there were things that he wanted to message to the community, one could, reasonably assume he might try to do it through that channel. That's not really the way that things work. I mean, when you're sitting on a group like that and this person has locked out their own inspector general who used to be the police chief in the city of Sacramento, so not exactly some far left person, right? You know that you're not particularly effective, right? And so certainly have tried to raise concerns with him and have tried to maintain a, I guess I'll say a cordial or, working relationship with him, but I don't think it has been particularly effective, in part because I think he is deeply committed to his beliefs. And I think that his actions stem from ideology, not from ignorance.
Right.
Ooh,
when was the last time this committee, this oversight body, quote unquote, convened?
We convene every other month. Our March meeting was canceled because of COVID-19. And our November meeting the date was changed. And so I was unable to attend. So I have actually not been at a meeting since August. But we do have email communication that comes out about the group, and I'm not sure when we'll next meet. There's not really a good technology option available yet, although they're not subject to the Brown Act or anything. So it's not as if they have to be recorded, but we haven't.
Right.
We just have, we don't even send out calendar notices for this. This is a very low tech kind of group. And I think I'm the youngest person on it, with the exception of maybe one other person by probably 20 years, being very generous, maybe 30. So there's also just a generational gap in terms of that, but it's mostly filled with, older people who are very supportive of the sheriff and are there to thank him for showing up to their community events. And so it's very often the case that I'm the only person who shows up and is like, here are the concerns in the community. What do you have to say about this? We want answers about that. So, that's kind of the role. And I have been trying my hardest to leave, but they won't let me.
Well, let's talk about the concern. Oh, no, go Shannon.
I was interested to know, and I should have looked this up before we started recording, but do any of you know if there's any data available for how many people have been pulled over or fined? Has that happened up until now? Or are we now saying...
That I don't know.
I don't think that's been CIPRA'd yet either. That's California Public Records Act. So you could reach out to these law enforcement entities and probably learn this information. Depends on the law enforcement entity, because a lot of them are super opaque and they don't like to share this info. But that could be something. Maybe I'll make a note and I'll reach out tonight, and we'll see if there have been any citations pre this announcement. But Chief Hahn has really been hammering away the message that it's all about education now, it's not about enforcement. So we'll see. But with this shift, I mean, what are the community concerns?
Oh gosh,
Well, obviously, like there's a lot of potential for abuse of this, right? I mean, that is going to be the number one concern, is that it kind of gives cops carte blanche to just pull people over and be like, where are you going or what are you doing, right? Which is what we're looking to avoid. Like, to be completely fair, if you are going to like take the language that they're using in these interviews like in good faith, it sounds like they don't want to do that. It sounds like that really they're just saying like, don't have a house party with 100 people at it, or we'll come and fuck your shit up. You know, it does not sound like the cops are interested in just like pulling people over to ask them where they're going. So hopefully that's true. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I think the part that I think about is the cops are supposed to not be interested in fucking with people experiencing homelessness and moving them around during this time either.
Right.
And they haven't stopped doing that. Just today on my drive home at K and 19th around 12:30, there were 3 SAC PD SUVs and 4 cops that I could count that were having folks move, like pack up their shit and move. Like, what the fuck are they doing? So, you know, my point is just they're not always transparent. And yeah, I know that you know that. You know,
well, yeah, I mean, that's why I said if you take the language in good faith, because that's a pretty big if when you're dealing with SAC PD, right?
Right.
Like,
you know, how many times do they lie to us before we say, okay, no, we don't trust you?
Right.
Right.
And I think that's the major concern here, right? So Teresa and I were out for a walk. It was probably our walk sometime last week, and we saw no fewer than 5 or 6, you know, SUVs out, police vehicles. And the whole time I kept thinking, right, because they're essential. So, and people are not out in the way that they were before, and people are not driving in the numbers they were before. And so there's not a lot to do. And, you know, what we say about, you know, people who don't have kids who don't have something to do between 3 and 5 p.m., idle mind is the devil's playground, right? And so the same thing is true, I think, that's happening here, which is that they're out and they are looking for things to do because they are deemed essential, but they're not essential in a pandemic. Like, we actually need some other folks to be stepping in and to be providing, I mean, you know, calls to the suicide hotline are up. We need more folks doing domestic violence work right now. We need those kind of folks. And a lot of our officers aren't equipped for that. And so I think that they're bored. And I think that, you know, given the demographics of my neighborhood, I'm not surprised that they're out in full force, just pulling folks over and seeing what's up.
Yeah, bored cops in this city is absolutely like could not be more dangerous, especially because they know that there's no fucking oversight. You know, they can do whatever the fuck they want, and they act on that impulse with that knowledge all the time as it stands. But yeah, if they're just fucking sitting around twiddling their thumbs, it's going to be bad for people.
I've seen already, you know, to your point, Flo, like during this, literally nothing's like, nobody's out, nobody's doing anything. If there's one call, 7 or 8 cars show up. We've discussed this before. I saw them show up when a man experiencing homelessness was having a mental health crisis, and the owner of this hotel wanted him out of their garage, and 15 cops showed up. They cuff him and roll him over, and he's screaming and crying. And we have to, I'm cop watching, and they basically just, finally the ambulance shows up and they take him to the hospital because he's having a crisis. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, when I see something like that, it makes me think that there's an onus on us, and again, this is that paradox, right? We're not outside. We're rarely going outside. We're trying to stay in if we're doing what we're supposed to be doing. But when we are out, I think it is incumbent on us to cop watch.
Yeah, I agree. I've heard some conversations in advocate circles about how folks think that we should repurpose PD for doing things like social work for people experiencing homelessness, or like getting out into communities of color and just like being there as community educators. And as I was reading this article and as, you know, we're talking now and thinking about it, it's just like, even I have this like deep to my core negative full body reaction when I think about police. Like, how could we think of, oh, salute. How could we think about using cops in any other way? Like, we should be pulling power away from them at this point.
We should be defunding them, having a smaller staff, and funding actual social workers, actual mental health workers.
Right, 100%.
And
correct.
Flo, you have said this in the past, and we try and remind everybody, the mayor and all of city council threw $10 million more every year to the cops through Measure U funding.
Mm-hmm.
Right. What the fuck?
They were already getting the lion's share of the first half cent.
Right.
So almost if not more, 50% for sure. I think it was $25 million. Yeah. So that's more than 50% of the first half cent, because it was less than $50 million. And then when we doubled it in November of 2018, they added an additional $10 million from the second half cent that was supposed to go to inclusive economic development and other things throughout the city. And that was what it was campaigned on. And that is not, the very first expenditure was to them.
It's insane. And now they're out here buying tanks, you know? So like, for a long time, especially directly after a stop and frisk in New York, there was a lot of talk on the liberal side about community policing, right? Mom and pop shop cop, right? Where you go in and you're talking to business owners.
That was Dr. Seuss.
You're talking to business owners, you're learning who the grandmas of the neighborhood are, and like, you know, you're building rapport and trust, and they'll let you know when like there's a bad guy in the neighborhood doing bad things. But like, how much is that even a reality at this point? We've seen time and again, and Flo, you could probably describe this better than I can, but communities of color do not feel protected by the police.
Not at all. And I think, you know, I like to tell my story that I was asked to do a ride along with SAC PD, probably, I guess it was sometime last summer. And the two calls that we did respond to, I think the purpose of me being asked to go on this ride along was to, you know, have a better understanding of what they do, et cetera. And I felt like I already had that, but I agreed to it. And I walked away being even less trustful and having like more concerns about what was happening. And the most egregious of the calls was one where we were called out to a place where there was a family in the backyard, and a guy who was experiencing homelessness had wandered in. Their front door, I guess, was unlocked, and he was making himself a sandwich. He had on no shoes, he had on no shirt, and he was just helping himself to the things that were in their refrigerator. They could see through the window that they knew they didn't have any weapons in the house, and he was not behaving violently. He was just hungry. And so the police show up, and we show up on this call. There are already 8 or 9 officers there, and they are about to send the K-9 unit in. And for those of you who are not aware, the K-9 unit does not de-escalate situations. They are trained to go in and bite someone, at which then we would have to send this person to the emergency room, right, and have them stitched up or worse, right? And so the officer I was with, who happened to be, you know, in charge, I don't know rankings, but maybe a sergeant or something like that, said to them, well, did you try calling him outside first? 8 officers there. They were about to send the unit in. Like, this is no exaggeration. And they said, no, we were going to send the K-9 unit in. And he said to them, well, why don't you try calling him outside first? See if that works before you escalate. Sure enough, they call him outside. He comes right outside, one shoe on, shirtless, hands up in the air, you know, mustard on his chin from a sandwich, and goes with them, right? And we just saved $1 million in medical bills, right? And whatever else that might have ensued from that.
Right.
There were 8 fully functional deputized officers there, and no one was going to say to them, maybe try calling the unarmed guy in an unarmed house outside, who the family can see through the window, outside first. That doesn't inspire confidence.
Oh. No.
Right.
I mean, it's like the very first thought is the worst case scenario, and then reacting to that, whether or not the worst case scenario is actually happening, right? Like,
because that's what they're trained for, right? So like, even some of their training is very traumatic. It starts with like you watching 17 officers, like montage of 17 officers getting killed. And it's like, what did they do wrong? And what do you don't want to be them. And it's very like, it's not focused on like, what is most of your job going to be? It's going to be responding to community calls, and this is your community, and get to know them. And then we're going to teach you some things to be able to de-escalate really high stress or really violent situations. But that's not what it is. It's all about like, let's terrorize you first into believing that your life is in danger, and then send you out to believe that you're going to protect the people who you just watched a montage of them, of potentially any of them trying to kill you.
Right.
I'm so glad that they're the ones out there during this stay-at-home thing, just taking care of all of us.
Yeah, and they're
They
just,
certainly
we
sound
trust them to de-escalate.
Yeah, they sound like they've got the unhoused situation well in hand.
Oh yeah, totally.
Well, there's always a challenge too. Like, there are a lot of people, a lot of neolibs, and of course more conservative folks, that they do feel protected by the police, and it very often is white people, right? And so it's like, you would describe to me once, Flo, that like you go to different communities and you ask, do you consider the fire department a community good? And everyone says yes in every neighborhood. Do you consider the EMTs, ambulances, a public service? They say yes. Do you consider police a public service? Do you know that they're serving your community? White people say yes. Black people do not say that. They feel like they're an occupied force in their neighborhoods.
Right.
And what's really interesting about it is Black police officers feel that way too, which is astonishing. So there's they do these surveys, and one of them, I think most recently, was published in 2017 or 2018, and there was a disparity in the perception of Black officers versus white officers in terms of their relationship with various communities, including racial and ethnic communities, and whether or not some of the incidents that are publicized in the news are because of deep systemic issues. And the Black cops were like, yes. And the white cops were like, what do you mean? And so it's really interesting to see that even among people who have chosen this as their profession, there's still a racial divide in how they see themselves.
Yeah.
That's wild as hell.
We can link to that in the show notes.
Yeah, let's do that. So again, everyone, Cop Watch, Cop Watch, Cop Watch, and to steal New York's quote for our own means, if you see something, say something, both to the officers and to the public. Record it, let people know what's happening.
Yeah.
And maybe, we can always contact our public officials about what we don't think is right about where they're putting their funding, how their decision making is going when it comes to a public health crisis that demands more money towards our medical, our social work, our mental health care communities than towards, law enforcement.
Right. Buying these guys a bear claw.
A
Yeah.
bear claw?
I'm just decided that that's what I'm calling that thing.
Yeah, I like it. It's
the tank.
Bear cat.
Yeah.
Okay, it took me a minute.
The bear cat.
But it works on a number of levels with law enforcement. You see what I'm doing there?
Yeah, I like it. I like it a lot.
That's good.
Because a bear claw is delicious.
Exactly.
Well, we were going to discuss a little bit about Newsom's plans to open California, but that was a great conversation. But I think it did go a little long. Should we gloss over that and hop into really what a topic that has been and is very much related to what we were just discussing in Black and brown communities being overrepresented in coronavirus cases and deaths throughout the U.S. Flo, you were speaking with Sammy at Cap Radio recently, kind of discussing some of the determinants of that and some of the things we can do to ameliorate this really unconscionable phenomenon, right? So can you tell us first, I guess, the lay of the land? What are the numbers, and what are the determinants for those numbers?
Sure, absolutely. So first and foremost, I think it's important to recognize that, we're seeing these patterns nationwide, in part because of the patterns that already existed, right? And so a lot of the vulnerabilities are not just because there are inherent sort of biological differences. It's because of institutional racism and the toxic stress it produces and the way in which that shows up in our bodies and our physical health and our life expectancy and all of these things. And so when we look at some of the risk factors for something like COVID-19, we see things like asthma, and we see things like hypertension and diabetes and chronic obstructive pulmonary disorder, all of which are tied to toxic stress and racism, and all of which are disproportionately experienced by Black and Latinx communities. And so it's not surprising that we're seeing similar patterns among those who are getting incredibly sick and dying. And so for California, we're not quite in the shape that some of the other places that are reporting are, but I always like to add the caveat that we also haven't done the amount of testing that we should to even be to feel really solid in what we're saying.
Right.
But from preliminarily, what we're seeing already in the state of California is that Black Californians make up about 6% of the state, but are making up somewhere around 12% of those who have died from coronavirus. And so that obviously means the rate is 2 times higher among this population, and that's not what we should expect. And so we have not certainly had the widespread, of the disease that other places have. And yet we're still seeing similar patterns playing out. And so I think, to have the U.S. Surgeon General saying things like, stop, drinking and doing drugs and, and smoking cigarettes. And it's just kind of like, you're going back to the same respectability beliefs around behaviors being the primary driver. And I'm not here to tell anybody to pick up, a smoking habit or, to drink to excess or any of those things. But what I am saying is that that's not the underlying reason why there's a disparity among Black folks. And to say, tell your abuela and tell Big Mama and Pop, that we need to lay off these things completely takes off the hook our systems that were put in place on purpose to dehumanize people and that have long and far-ranging consequences. So I'm always annoyed when I'm hearing those comments because they lack context and they're not telling the full story.
Can you kind of give us like a rundown on the context for that quote and who was saying it and why? Because I had not heard about this until you sent over that info, and I could not fucking believe what I was reading when I saw what this dude was saying. Yes.
So our U.S. Surgeon General was the one who said this, and it was in the context. They had been doing a really good job all week. I actually thought of, especially Dr. Fauci was really doing a great job of being able to say, the disparities we're seeing are caused by social determinants of health and institutional racism. I thought that message was coming across very clearly, and I think for some people it was the first time they may have even been hearing that message. But then our U.S. Surgeon General, who happens to be a Black man, gets up and gives this message that is very much counter to that and really is, in trying to sort of speak the language of a community, was also incredibly patronizing to that community and in some ways condescending to that community, because the message there was, if you all would just stay home and stop behaving badly, you wouldn't die from this.
Right.
Instead of saying, we recognize all these factors at place and you're at greater risk, And therefore, it's incredibly important that you do the following things, right? Like, that's the full conversation.
Right.
And that wasn't the conversation that was taking place that day. And that was really infuriating. And so he did a press conference where he said that, and he literally said the words, tell your abuela, or do it for your abuela, do it for Big Mama, do it for Pop Pop.
It's fucking incredible. Absolutely incredible.
Was this a presser or was this a one-on-one interview?
This was a presser.
Okay. Because I know it was Yamich Alcindor who was reporting this, but I sometimes I'm not sure, and I just wanted to verify that. I love the link you sent too, because it's the root, and it is it's just like it shows all of the righteous indignity, like anger that people should be feeling when they hear this fucking
yes shit. Yes, I shared theirs because I liked that it was classified under excuse me what. That is that is like the best subcategory ever.
It like reads like news, like in the first like straight news, right? Like an AP in the first few paragraphs, until it's unclear whether Adams got his signals crossed, went off script, or simply lost his damn mind.
Right. Yeah, that's what I love about the root, and but it was it was covered by other news sources as well, but I just appreciated their righteous indignation and their sharing my sentiment. So in terms of, go ahead.
Oh no, go ahead. I was just going to ask you a question, but finish your thought.
Yeah, please.
I was going to kind of ask you to give us sort of the rundown, like the cliff notes on, like you said earlier when you were talking about what he should have been saying instead of this stupid shit. Communities of color are at a higher risk for something like COVID-19. Can you kind of give a rundown for people who aren't as familiar with, who don't either live in one of those communities and are not as familiar with how things operate, why that is? Like, what are the factors that make it so that communities of color are at more risk to something like COVID-19 than others?
Absolutely. I'd be happy to tell this story because I think it's not discussed often enough. So a lot of what's happening is, there are going back to, the founding of this country, right? We had people who were brought here who were enslaved, right? Fast forward, we passed policies to keep people separated. And even though those policies go away, the impact of them doesn't. So you have, residential segregation. Well, people don't sell their houses every day, right? And so what that ends up meaning is that even years later, you still have highly segregated neighborhoods. And the cost of houses in those neighborhoods aren't the same. And your access to school is different. When we're only talking, 70 years ago, we started desegregating schools, and that didn't happen overnight. And so just recognizing how all those things combine to make it so that in communities of color, especially in the U.S., there's often a challenges to accessing food, right? So there's food deserts. There's, violence that is taking place in the neighborhood. There is an occupying force, often by the police. There are all of these factors that come together to create stress. Black women are one of the groups that are most likely to be overburdened by housing and spending more than 50% of their income on housing. So that means when jobs are lost, they also happen to be primary breadwinners for a lot of families. And so when jobs are lost, that's completely destabilizing and a high risk for experiencing homelessness. So, just all of these combinations kind of coming together, and we know the role that financial stress plays. We know the role of being in lower wage jobs and relying on them and having less control over your time and your schedule and your workplace. So all of those things come together to create conditions where people end up being sicker because they've experienced a lot more stress throughout the course of their lives. And yes, there are resilience factors and buffering factors, but some of those risks don't go away. And so that's a heavy toll that it takes on communities. And so then when you have an infectious disease come along like coronavirus, you just layer that on top of people whose immune systems were already tapped from having to keep them going and keep them fighting against their environment so often.
Yeah.
And so that's why we see these patterns. And so it was never surprising. In fact, many of the public health advocates were saying, we need to see some data early. You need to be collecting these data. And what we're finding as we're beginning to collect those data we're seeing the patterns exactly as what we would expect in terms of who's at highest risk for dying.
So what can we do, or what can be done as an answer, as a response to the fact that Black and brown people are more adversely affected by coronavirus? What can be done now while we're fighting it, while we're in the fucking thick of it?
Absolutely. One of the things is we need to definitely make the argument for stronger economic protections, right? So, wiping out the rents or making it so that they won't be due all at the same time and those kind of things, because the more that people have the ability to abide by the recommendations, the financial ability, the better equipped they'll be to actually be able to follow them. Like, people are still trying to figure out how to live. And so if there's a job that requires them to go out, they will. And so if we're not providing cash aid, if we're not protecting people's housing, they will make decisions, even if they're in the high risk category. And even if their job is, it offers other ways of doing it, if there's a way for them to make money, let me start that over. Even if they're working in positions where they could potentially stay home and take advantage of sick time and things like that, if they know they're relying on that money to be able to pay for rent and to be able to cover their other living expenses, they make decisions that are not in the best interest of themselves because of their own health status or their entire family because of who they live with. Right. And so I think that's often overlooked, but is incredibly important. The other thing that I think we need to do right now is to advocate for making sure that we're actually measuring and that we're increasing the amount of testing, because the more testing we have available, the more people we can get into care early. Yes. It also means that if we're actually identifying the numbers, we can also begin to do some contact tracing. And so that can help us to be able to identify people who may be at high risk and monitor them more closely. And so the challenge that I'm seeing is that in Sacramento, as of yet, we're not seeing disparities in terms of who's dying. The Black population is about 10% of the county and is making up about 10% of the cases. The challenge, though, is that we only have racial and ethnic data on like 60-some% of the cases that have come in. And so that means that we're essentially missing about 35% of the cases in terms of racial and ethnic data. So that's, almost 300 cases. So even if just 10% of them were reclassified as Black, you'd see a huge disparity emerge. Or if 10% of them were reclassified as Asian or, Native Hawaiian and Pacific Islander, you suddenly reclassify everyone. So I'm not convinced yet that we're not also seeing racial disparities here because of how poor the data quality is around race and ethnicity.
Right. Like, who is getting tested? It's a privilege right now.
Right.
Correct.
So something, as Flo is talking, something that I think about is, and I know we weren't going to dive into this, but I do want to bring up, the governor this week laid out how the state will decide to open again. And the governor he's saying that science and not politics is going to be California's guide. He has 6 indicators for when it will be safe to open the state. The first one is ability to monitor and protect our communities through testing, contact tracing, isolating, and supporting those who are positive or exposed. And what we're hearing from Flo, and what I know as someone who came out of a community of color, I'm a brown woman, I grew up in North Long Beach. It's a poor community. Number one isn't going to happen for the community that I grew up in, or for the communities, you know, with folks of color who are fucking dying because they don't have access to the shit they need in order to survive this thing. So what the fuck is the governor gonna do? Like, if
that's the problem.
The big question.
Yeah, exactly. There's the problem.
And it's just like, to me, it's such a flag that this is the number one of 6 indicators.
Right.
And there's no fucking way. There's no way that we're going to be able to meet that standard because we know that what's true is that communities of color are experiencing this at a higher rate than privileged communities.
Much like with our concerns with the homeless community, which, by the way, that's also a racial issue. Black people are deeply overrepresented in the homeless community. But like, we as homeless advocates, when Gavin was saying he was going to do this and that, we were like a little hopeful, and perhaps naively, because he didn't do shit. And these communities that are already, they don't have a voice, they don't have a seat at the table, they don't have, as Flo says, these marble countertops. They're not going to have a say on if and when they get their aid, their slice of the pie that we all need to get through this. There's plenty of reason to feel like the current, California government will fail this community once again.
Yeah, I had this experience at work today where one of the staff was interviewing a guest who was just tested for COVID. And so she's waiting to get her results, but her Obama phone is like janky as fuck. And sometimes you call it and it just doesn't ring. So she was like pleading with us, like, if we can get her in contact with the county, make sure to tell the county to call 3 times, because my phone doesn't always work, at least 3 times. And I walked away from that just like so frustrated, as I am every day that I leave work, and people experiencing homelessness are just left out, to die at the hands of this thing. But that story comes back to me now because this was a woman who was not much older than I am, and I'm 37. She's a Black woman living with a lot of underlying conditions. She has COPD. She actually had walking pneumonia recently. She has a breathing machine that she has to use nightly, but she lives in her fucking car, so she can't use it as often as she's supposed to. And like she's an example. Like, when Flo's talking about this stuff, like, I see her face of someone who may not survive this. And there's fucking no one doing anything to help her. Like, sure, we send an email to the county and we're like, yo, can you get her some support? And they're like, we'll see what we can do. But is she a Sacramento County resident? Because the county of Sacramento can only help people who have established residency.
Oh my God. Define resident.
Come on.
Oh my God.
Come on.
I think that's a whole, like, we could have a whole episode on that shit, on like when they developed that criteria. But this is, this is about another young Black woman who is just being just thrown out, like,
yeah.
And it's fucked up. I can't. This episode is making me mad.
Yeah, sorry. Well, today, a reporter during Newsom's, daily presser said, hey, do you know that all of these trailers that were given to Sacramento County are just sitting empty at Cal Expo? And it's like, this is what what's happening, right? And like, I'm deeply worried that, you know, in as much as we're watching it in our fight as homeless advocates, just being, it's an abject failure at this point. I'm worried that Black and brown communities are also going to be dismissed, or they'll have promises given to them that just never come through, and that's that.
Yeah.
I mean, and the issue with that is that, like, that worry is so valid because it's founded in this
history,
community's historical decisions to just throw people away, right? Like, it's not like you are sitting at home anxious about people of color, people experiencing homelessness just being forgotten during a time of crisis, just out of nowhere.
Just for no reason, without any precedent.
Right. This community has time and time again shown that they don't give a shit. I mean, correct. And we've discussed this before. Like, we can use the example of basketball courts being shut down versus golf courses being left open. We know why the fuck that decision was made.
We can even use looking around at who voted for and against Measure G, right? Just on the March 3rd ballot. And if you look precinct by precinct, the more affluent communities said nope, and the low-income communities said, please set this money aside for this purpose.
Right.
For the listeners, what was Measure G?
Measure G was the measure on the March 3rd ballot that would allocate 2.5% of the city's budget to youth preventive services and things like after school programs, things to support youth organizations in the community, to make sure that there was enough money. And it was 2.5% flat funded. It was not a new tax. It was just going to take that money out of whatever the budget was to set it aside. And it would probably be somewhere around $12.5 million a year, and it would last for a little over a decade.
Yeah.
And precinct by precinct, you see that the low-income communities and the communities that are primarily, comprised of people of color were like, please set this money aside because we don't trust what you'll do with it if you have discretion. And overwhelmingly, our more affluent communities said, no, we want you to be able to pivot because, if I need one of those city contracts, I want you to be able to find some money for me.
Yeah.
It's really a tale of the haves and have-nots.
Yeah, and it's a cycle.
Totally.
It's a classic cycle. Again, and I don't want to bring down listeners because I think this is a moment. This is a historic moment, and I think there is potential for some really great change. But we have to find our ways to make it, to really take hold of the moment. With that said, what are some ideas for listeners who are not happy with Flo, all that you've just reported, and want to make a difference right now?
Well, I think there are a couple of ways. I think for one, we really do need to lay on our electeds and not let them off the hook right now because they're busy doing, providing some ability to, survive this, and their minimal, contributions in some ways compared to what could have been done beforehand and even what should be done right now. But I don't think we should let them off the hook and thinking that, because they're busy doing that we can't call them out on these issues that are ongoing and that are still going to be a problem even long after the economy supposedly has recovered, right? It's going to deepen the divide, and it's going to make these issues even worse. And so I really do feel like we still need to lay in on them to really have an equity analysis, really thinking about what's happening that's not okay between these communities, and how do we shore up our response to it since we didn't shore up our prevention. So I think that's always an important call to action.
So which electeds, because we, as we saw with the homelessness thing, and a mutual friend of ours, Flo, and I got into it a little bit, because these state level politicians are allowed to say, well, our hands are clean. We gave the money to the counties. They're not acting. So like, where does the onus lie? Because how do we get people moving on making sure that these disparities in Black and brown communities are ameliorated as best they can be?
Yeah, so the challenge is we need people acting at multiple levels. And that's the part that creates an issue at times, because you're right. Sometimes the money has already been given to, the county, or has been given to the city, and they haven't acted on it. But that entity that gave the money absolutely has the ability to step in and say, I want this done by Friday.
Right.
Or I'm taking my money back. Right. And so yes, there's a washing of the hands of, we gave the money away. I don't know. But there's also the additional pressure you could put on them that you want to see what they've done with the money that you've given them. You could include with the money that you're allocating a deadline. And that's the part that we're not seeing. And so at some place, people can drag their feet on when they want to act. And that shouldn't be allowable. So I would say, if you're seeing things at the local level, the sack follows the money, right? So if you're seeing things at the local level, follow the money, literally, because figure out who gave the money. If it's local money, then you just stay on those electeds. If it's state money, then you get on those electeds to make sure that they understand that this is not happening at the local level. So everybody has some ownership of this, and we just have to make sure that we're reaching out and operating in multiple ways.
Great. I love it. Any more questions on this topic?
I have a question, but it's not related to this topic.
Oh,
go for it.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if I mentioned this on the show or not before, but I'm currently I'm not working right now, so I have all this free time.
Mm-hmm.
And it's been nice because it's been this opportunity for me to find all this great voices content to fill up my time with, and that part has been great.
Ow.
But here's the rub. I've run out of this great content, and I've scoured the web. I want more, but I can't find it. So I guess my question to you, Dave, is if I want more great voices content, where should I go?
Yeah. So if, like me, you have finished Netflix in the month that you've been in quarantine, we do
including the bonus episode of Tiger King.
Actually, I have not jumped into that one yet. That's thank you, Flo. That's a great reminder.
That is a really good reminder. I forgot too.
We do have all sorts of stuff going on with Voices right now. Our website is voicesrivercity.com. We're on Facebook as Voices River City. Flo, again, thank your husband for finally liking it like 2 years after I asked him to this week. We're on Twitter at Voices River City. We're on Instagram. I'm really enjoying the action on Instagram too.
Yeah, it's been fun.
Yeah.
All right.
I love the clips that you include. It's always a joy to figure out what exactly it's going to be on the little post there. But yeah, so we're on there as well. We've got community essays coming out. Skylar has an essay coming out I'm really excited about. I've got another friend, a state worker, who's working on something really important about the safety of workers, which obviously we talked about tonight. And we, of course, there's a Sack Follows the Money project and plenty more to come out there. I'm a journalist, and so unlike you three suckers, I am technically legally allowed to go out and get work done, journalism done.
Yo, I go to work every day.
Not like, but like, there's not like journalists, we don't have like cards or anything. So if I'm like, oh, I'm a journalist, they're gonna be like, who do you write for? I'll be like, Voices River City, and they'll be like, oh, you're those cop hating motherfuckers.
Yeah, don't tell the cops that you work for Voices River City.
Yeah,
Right.
I'll say I'm freelancing for someone. But we, all of this stuff helps support us. So we do have a Patreon, and we're just super thankful for all your help, all you listeners. We are patreon.com/Voices River City. If you don't have the money, don't pay this month. It's okay. Don't pledge. Even if we ever do anything behind a wall, just reach out to me and like, we'll just give you a link. Yeah, you know, all of our work, all of our episodes come through there. You can do as low as $5 a month, which is a beer at the bar that you're not going to anyway right now. So view it through that lens, support us. We are so thankful for all of you who do. And each one of us is on Twitter, and we're all very fun and sassy in our own way. I am at Kempa.
I'm Guillotine for you. That's Guillotine, the number 4 YOU.
I am Shan N.D. Stevens.
And I am at Flojaune, Flojaune.
And that's us. One more thing. What was it, today or yesterday? We hit our 5,000th download.
Holler.
Yeah, huge milestone.
Absolutely amazing. It's super exciting. It looks like we're on path to have our first 1,000 download month too, and that's even after we added the YouTube element, which I'm sure siphons some of our viewership away. So I just love to see how things are moving with this, and I'm so excited to see where we end up going with this.
You know, I've been thinking about this a lot lately, and I love to think about it. I'm loving it.
Yeah, I'm thinking about it right now, and I gotta tell you, I fucking love it.
Yeah, same. But seriously, it has been like watching these numbers come in has been really, really encouraging and humbling. It's so, I don't know, it's so cool to feel like there's like a community out here now.
Totally.
Who's all doing it. And yeah, I mean, it's an awesome feeling. You guys are all awesome. Thank you so much for listening to this show.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah.
And, go ahead, Shannon.
Oh, I was just gonna say I think now more than ever, because people find themselves with a little bit more time than they generally would have. I love just getting text messages off and on from folks that had never listened before, but they're like, I got shit else to do, so I'm gonna listen. And now I'm a fan. Like,
that's so cool.
It's really cool. And this is something that, as Skylar has said before, I mean, I think we've all said it, this is something that has become a part of our toolbox in terms of just like maintaining sanity, and it's a positive outlet for all of us, and it's a great byproduct to just sitting around and fucking yelling about injustice. So I love it, and I'm so grateful. I'm so grateful for everyone. This is amazing.
Same. It's been weirdly really good for my mental health to just know that there are people out there that feel the same way, and things are hard, and it's okay to not be okay sometimes,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, did we thank Be Brave Bold Robot yet?
We did not. This episode, I wanted to switch it up and say, "Hey, fuck you, Be Brave Bold Robot."
Oh, good call. Yeah, that's a hard left that they won't.
We never liked you anyway. And Dean, if I see you on the street, you better turn the fuck around.
Yeah,
because I'm coming for you, man.
Hell yeah, dude! Let's get a beef going with Be Brave Bold Robot. This is a great idea.
Yes.
I'm not that tough. I'm a little worried about this.
I mean, they know you.
That's true.
So yesterday I was at work and I said to a coworker, like, I can't get this fucking song out of my head. And I can't even tell you now what song it was. And she was like, you know what fucking song I can't get out of my head? That goddamn Voices song. And so she sang it for the next 4.5 hours. And I have never hated anything as much in a moment. But on the real.
It's catchy. It's great. It's a beautiful
great. I love it.
Yeah.
Catchy
It is.
and great.
I do find myself singing along if I listen to an episode.
Same.
Like, you can't help yourself.
Well, why don't we strike up some music now? It'll be just the instrumental for you listeners who want to sing along.
Yeah.
Oh, precious.
All right, guys. Well, everybody, thank you again for listening. Everybody, stay safe, stay healthy.
Yeah.
Try and keep your chin up as much as you can, and we're all doing it together. So, yeah, we'll see you guys Tuesday.
Fuck, because today's Thursday. Bye.
All right.